Although I think of myself kind of as a suburban kid growing up in a small town, as I did in Connecticut, it's technically accurate to say that I grew up in the woods. When we moved to New Canaan, away from the busy street in Norwalk, Connecticut, where I'd spent my babyhood up to age 6, my grandmother, my mom's mom, forever after referred to our new home as being out in the sticks. "Shirley, why do you want to go move out to the sticks?" she'd say. You couldn't see our house from the road. We lived up a steep driveway that was really a nightmare in the winter. And our house was settled in the midst of lots and lots of trees. I did not then, nor do I now, consider myself an outdoorsy person. I like to say that I'm an indoorsy person. And in fact, my mother often had to shoo me outside to play. Left to my own preferences, I'd rather be reading or listening to Broadway albums, and later talking on the phone to my friends. "Go outside," she'd say. So my siblings and I would go out to the yard or play with the neighborhood kids and the local ponds. The truth is, I loved our trees deeply without realizing it. I took them for granted. They were like family. I didn't think about them in any specific way, but I felt their presence always. Silent witnesses, sometimes making beautiful music as they swayed with a gentle breeze or rocked with a harder wind. I'd go back behind our house. I don't know what was our property or what was the neighbors, and no one cared. And I'd walk until we got to what we called the meadow. There I would sometimes lie down on green moss and smell the warm, fragranced air and just daydream the hours away. At night, my mother would have to remind us to go outside and get our dog, Pippin, and out of her fenced-in run in the backyard. And when I was the one who went to get Pippin, my heart would often pound with fear as I ran with the dog back to the house. You couldn't let go of her collar because she was kind of nutty and she'd run away. The big looming dark trees had nighttime secrets that I didn't really want to know. Some kind of knowledge of good and evil, human and earth history, life and death. I respected them greatly at those times, with awe and love mixed together. The woods always scared me, but it was a good fear. My mom sold our house when I was going off to college, which was a painful loss to me. I wasn't ready to move yet. My father had recently died, and I could have used a few more years at home, or to have a home to come back to after college breaks. So to this day, not only do I dream of that house in New Canaan, I much more frequently dream of the woods and trees in the yard and surrounding it, my own trees, my friends and witnesses. In those dreams, I touch the bark of those beloved trees and I cry. I don't know if they're maple trees or elms or oaks. I wish I'd thought to learn their species when I lived among them and grew up under their protection, but maybe it's better that way. In my mind, they're individuals, and they're also a community. And I am like Adam and Eve in the primordial story of creation before Adam was given the privilege of naming the creatures in Eden. Maple, I could say, or oak, or lilac, if I knew. But I only cry in those dreams, and I touch them and I say, my trees. I was not really surprised, therefore, when I read The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben recently. I wasn't surprised to find that just as we should know, or at least have suspected about every living thing by now, trees are not silent sentinels growing all on their own and dying the same way, but are actually in community with each other. Trees actually feed each other. They communicate dangers, insect infestations, for instance, through scent. And they throw out those lovely blossom scents, not just to please you and me, but also to invite bees to sate themselves. Trees communicate visually, too, and electrically, through a form of nerve cell at the tips of their roots. They may communicate also through sound waves. Science is still learning about this. There's been a little bit of criticism of Wohllebent's treatment of this subject. He's been accused of anthropomorphizing trees, that is, attempting to give them human qualities in an effort to sympathize human opinion toward them. And I just think of that as so sad. We all know that trees are trees, that they're not people. But obviously, they have a lot more in common with the human species than it first appears. And I am, for one, really grateful and excited to know that. Also, what's the harm of considering the reality of any aspect of creation in a way that helps us see more easily how all of creation is connected and shares the same needs and goals? It's one of the regrets of my life that I did not say goodbye to my trees before I moved away. But not that many years ago, I actually drove up my old driveway again and asked the current owner if I could do just that. And bless her heart, she was like, "Go ahead, I understand." I was like, moving through the yard. "Hi, I'm so glad to see you." I'm not the only one. Trees have always held a cherished place in human consciousness. The ancient sacred lore of every culture features trees. Buddha's Bodhi tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden, even that darned apple. The tree of life in Norse mythology, the tree upon which Christ was crucified. The fairy tree of Joan of Arc, by which she had visions of saints and angels. The Druid religion and their sacred groves of trees. Wherever there are forests and woods on the globe, trees have a place of honor in that culture. In the 1860s, Henry David Thoreau went to live in the woods in Concord because, as he wrote, he wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. And so Henry did that, but his woods were very close to the town of Concord and to friends, and so while he lived a somewhat hermetic existence in his tiny cabin for a couple of years, paying careful attention at all times of day and night and in all seasons to the landscape around him, and chronicling all his observations in the literary masterpiece called Walden, he had visitors, and he had pie from Auntie, and he knew just where to go if the woods got too deep and he felt that he was in trouble. It is wonderful to go into the woods in that way, as a naturalist, to observe and appreciate nature, to look to the tree's canopy and see birds. And when's our next bird walk, John? May 3rd? First Saturday in May. To stroll comfortably in and out of forests well marked by walking paths. I feel very lucky myself to have stood among the overwhelming grandeur of redwood trees in California. And I have a photo of myself back on the usher's table, standing inside of one, looking like a hobbit. We drove in to the redwood forest, though, and we drove away. We touched the edge of awe. We dipped our toe into it, you could say, before climbing back into our climate-controlled vehicle and going to a restaurant, probably, to sip iced tea and talk about the great old redwoods. But the woods for our great-great-great-grandparents was not so easily managed, either physically or emotionally. They were the location of mystery, and they were the place where all sorts of dread and magical creatures were thought to reside. Shapeshifters and elves, enchantresses, witches holding Sabbath observances with Satan in some lore, with very, very damaging consequences. On a practical level, the forest was where robbers and criminals met to plan their crimes, and it was where illicit lovers met for their romantic trysts. Stephen Sondheim wrote a musical called Into the Woods, where a group of characters we know well from Western folklore, Cinderella, Rapunzel, the witch, Little Red Riding Hood, the baker and his wife, Jack of Beanstalk fame, two Prince Charmings, and others all meet up in the woods in their various quests to get their wishes met. Each of them starts out with optimism about that quest. They're going to go to the festival to meet the prince, or they're going to break the spell that keeps them childless, in the case of the baker and his wife. Or they're going to meet Granny, who is sick in bed. When the baker's wife asks Little Red Riding Hood early on in the musical whether she should be going out into the woods alone because it's dangerous, Little Red replies, "The way is clear, the light is good. I have no fear, nor no one should. The woods are just trees, the trees are just woods. I sort of hate to ask it, but do you have a basket?" Because the baker and the wife have given her all of these sticky buns. And of course, she's not paying for any of them because she's a little girl. So there she has to get a basket as well as the free buns. As their various adventures connect and collide in the woods, all of these characters who start out to get their own personal wishes fulfilled realize that they need each other if they're going to survive. The trees are not just wood. The woods are not just trees. The woods are a wilderness, a wildness, a place that represents not only the power of nature, but the thicket of the human psyche. And that is why so many of our most instructive tales are located there. In the woods, all of the characters in this musical are brought into great peril, and one of them dies. After this tragedy, the characters turn on each other, and they fight, and they try to assign blame. Just as happens among humans when we are lost in the literal woods or in the wilderness territories of the mind. The ending of Into the Woods doesn't resolve neatly. For instance, Cinderella kicks her Prince Charming to the curb. And Little Red Riding Hood, she has to kill the wolf who has tried to eat her and Granny. And in the last scene, she comes skipping out, wearing not her iconic red cape, but a handsome wolf pelt. But all of the characters earn wisdom through their loss and pain. And there is forgiveness and hope for the next generation, represented by the baby that is born to the baker and his wife. So I wish to speak on behalf of going to the woods, less in the spirit of Thoreau than in the spirit of the Brothers Grimm, or in the spirit of your ancestors and mine, who had not just an appreciation of the woods, but a sense of awe and respect and healthy fear for them as the location of mystery and potential encounter with the spirit world and the gods. The woods are a precious resource that we must protect from plunder and destruction, as our study with Lisa Handy, the director of the Forest Campaign of the Environmental Investigation Agency, has informed us. But we must also respect and protect and go to the woods, literally and metaphorically, not just because we love what trees do for us, make our air fit to breathe, provide us with the materials for our houses and our houses of worship here, and furniture that we treasure and may pass down through generations, but also because we love and cherish what the woods can do to us, make us feel smaller and humbler, put us in our rightful place on the planet. Draw us into beautiful mystery. Put us in touch with the wildness of nature and human nature that we cannot control, but must learn to respect and cope with. Into the woods you have to grope, but that's the way you learn to cope. Into the woods to find there's hope of getting through the journey. Into the woods each time you go, there's more to learn of what you know. So into the woods, into the woods, into the woods and out of the woods and home before dark.